Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for a very special sneak preview of All Light Everywhere. This film won the Special Jury Prize for Nonfiction Experimentation at the 2021 Sundance Film Festival, and it's offered courtesy of Super Limited, which is going to be releasing the film in select theaters on Friday, June 4th. So please spread the word if you like the film. The writer, director, editor, Theo Anthony, will join us for a live Q&A immediately after the film. We're going to run the whole film here live in the webinar. It runs about an hour and 50 minutes. So I hope that you enjoy it, and please stick around for the Q&A. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for sticking around. I'd like to now introduce you to the writer, director, editor of the film, Theo Anthony. And Theo, let me just quickly change one setting here on the webinar. And we're good to go. Hi, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me.
So I'm very happy to say that this is the second film of yours that we've presented at the School of Cinematic Arts. And it's once again an incredibly enriching experience where you raise so many critical questions right now about how our society functions and where it's heading. I am really curious to know what the first question is that drove this project, because you've got so many interesting threads, but there must have been some specific moment that inspired you to actually make this into a feature.
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to say because it feels like all my films are sort of just kind of asking the same questions again and again. I'm kind of just making the same film over and over. So thanks for having me back. Yeah, I think just very broadly, I'm always interested in how just power works and how power works through institutions and how institutions control images, both their production and their circulation, and the context that creates. Just as a filmmaker, I've always been, and even before that, just as a journalist, I was always really interested in the relationship between filmmaker and the subject. I thought that the filmmaker was the least talked about force in the room a lot of the time. I think we, obviously you all are in the film school here, so you're familiar with like cinema verite, like traditions where that fly on the wall. That's like a very reductive way of putting it, but the cameraman disappears, and I, as a filmmaker, I thought that the camera seemed like the most obvious thing in the room. It seemed like it was shaping the people's behaviors. It was affecting how I spoke to people. It was the reason why we're there. We were there to make a film, and yeah, this film was like really an explicit way of interrogating that. I think with the particulars of the film and living in Baltimore at the time, during the uprising after the killing of Freddie Gray, sort of watching conversations happen around police reform was the first time I came around Axon, and you guys just saw the film, so that was how this particular film really started.
It started by exploring what Axon was up to.
Yeah, just like looking into Axon, and it was a company that I wasn't familiar with, and when I realized that they had just recently rebranded from Taser, I thought that link between camera and weapon was a really compelling one, and obviously one that goes back for a very long time.
I mean, the access that you get, I tell us a little bit about that, because you're showing us the construction of sort of the behind the scenes of them trying to kind of control their own messaging, and that stuff is really fascinating. But what kind of project did they understand they were a part of? What kind of project was it at the time that you shot with them? Because presumably your own subjectivity and POV on the subject probably changed over time as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think no matter who I'm filming with, I at this point, in the films that I make, I try to be as explicit as possible about the limitations of the film. I spent a lot of time talking with my subjects, showing them my proposed shot list, locations, what I want to do, even the questions that I'm going to ask. I really try to like put that out there because I think it's a conversation, a really valuable one to have with your subjects, whether or not you agree with them. And I think like for me, I think there's a type of filmmaking that, you know, utilizes like almost like these kind of like oil drilling metaphors of like going beneath the surface and really like unearthing your subject. And I think like, you know, I actually just really try to lean into that like surface presentation, that aesthetic. And I think, you know, with someone like Steve at Axon, we really wanted to embrace that PR aesthetic and tone. And, you know, just in terms of research, we watched every single video that he had ever done. And every single thing that he does in the film you just watched, he's done in other interviews. And so when structuring our shoot with him, we were really strategic to make sure that, you know, we were designing the shoot according to things that he had already done, and thus he would be comfortable doing again. So that was just the homework we did. You know, I think when you look at companies like Axon or, you know, any of these surveillance companies are always using the language of transparency and accountability. And so we always tried to like lean into that transparency and, you know, almost kind of like using it against them, just saying like, if you're transparent, like, you know, we're asking you to be transparency about how that transparency is working. So you either, you know, make do on your mandate, or you sort of risk appearing hypocritical to, you know, someone who's curious.
Yeah, what's fascinating about, I think, that establishing opening shot with the guy that runs Axon is that you sort of like go the 30 seconds back and show us, you know, the footage before the footage, which of course then, you know, sort of is kind of a theme later on when the police, when they're doing the demonstration, of like what activates the body cam footage. And throughout your movie, there are constant references to its own creation. And while a lot of it is about, you know, where is the edge of the frame and outside the frame, film obviously has the extra what's before and after, because it works, you know, in time as a medium. So I guess my question then becomes, after you had shot with them, was the next logical step to go to the police and sort of see it from the point of view of a training, or where did your journey go after you shot with them?
So the chronological order was actually the police classroom was like the very first thing that we shot, and then like 3 or 4 days later, we actually went to the Axon headquarters to film with Steve. Originally, our idea was just to really like have to trace the line of production, from really like the material of the camera itself. You're seeing it's assembled, understanding how the hardware works, to the software, to even like the implementation, and also like the marketing at the end. So really just try to trace this almost like entire supply chain of an ideology. Yeah, I think that's where we're going with that. I think I hadn't really thought of me appearing in it as like the buffer mode, but I definitely like that a lot, and I might steal that. But yeah, I think we had all these we had all these really clean scenes. We mapped it out. We storyboarded. There wasn't a whole lot. I always leave room for improvisation, but we came with a really like clear and defined checklist of what we were going to get. And I think we got to a point, with a community meeting where, that was the one time where we really weren't able to plan, and, things really exploded open that night, and the entire film changed, and it forced us to reconsider the entire structure of this film, which had been kind of arranged so cleanly. I wasn't in it. So, I think it was actually an instance of a film, you kind of imagine things going from like a rough cut to a final cut, and things getting cleaner and cleaner. And actually things went from being more clean and neat to messier and messier, and fuzzier and fuzzier, and, including more and more of me in it, which is not something I wanted to do, but given the subject matter, we felt was necessary.
That community meeting is really for me, it's the soul of the film. It's where, the sort of the supposed altruism
of the technology meets the real dangers of the people that it's being used against, and how that gets played out is really fascinating, because you are an extra level of documentation in there. The guy himself saying, like, I don't know how this would have played out differently if your camera wasn't in the room, is really fascinating. Can you talk about sort of first of all, forging the relationship with that that subject, and then at what point did you know you were going to get into the room with people who were going to actually have an opinion about whether or not they should be placed under surveillance?
Yeah, I mean, I think really early on we made a rule for ourselves that that this would be a film about like perpetrators and not victims, or framing anyone as victims, which there we felt was like there's a lot of films that talk about victims and not many that kind of turn their camera around and sort of do this more systemic study of other forms of violence and the people perpetrating them. So that was not a scene that we really planned on doing, and it was actually something that we did to really kind of like get in Ross's good graces, if I could sort of put it bluntly. Like, Ross, the CEO and founder of Persistent Surveillance Solutions, we had been emailing for like, I don't know, 6 or 7 months. And, he was giving us the whole pitch, and, we're like, all right, Ross, we just want to get in and we just want to see you use the software. That's it. Like, and he's like, well, I'm going to this community meeting. I'm like, I'm not interested in seeing people like you pitch it to a meeting, or to a community. Like, that's just not what this film is, And again, this is just sort of where we're at with the film. And that was actually I hadn't ever met Ross at that point. Like, me walking into that room was the first time I met Ross, and we filmed him in the dark room at the day after. And so we were just meeting Ross for the first time in person and getting set up and stuff like that. And, I mean, I think like, yeah, you're right. I think that's like the heart and soul of the film. I think it's like, it's not an easily reducible scene or people. There's no one viewpoint, and there's not supposed to be like one viewpoint. There's no victim. It's just a lot of different perspectives. We try to give it as much space as possible to air the complexities of that arrangement. And, it also to allow certain opacity to the subjects. We weren't there to sort of pry into their lives or sort of reduce them to victims of this technology. So that's all being said. Like, we got in that room, and we got everyone to sign these waivers and stuff like that. But it's like, it's a church, and there's people coming and going, and we're not going to stop the meeting every time someone comes in and say, oh, can you sign this? And so we someone walks in. It's a Black church that's like blocks away from where Freddie Gray was killed, and you see 2 white people leading the meeting, that Ross and his cameraman, and then me, obviously I'm a white guy, and my producer, who she's white as well. And you see 4 white people in a Black church, you're gonna assume they're together, and like there's no time to like actually say like actually he's pitching a spy plane, we're experimental documentarians, like that's like. And actually, like, it was really an important moment to like get outside of ourselves and to realize that actually, regardless of who we represented, what institutions or practices, whatever, we were still outsiders, and we were still taking something from that that scene there. So it was a scene that really broke up our own practices. Uncomfortable. It implicated us, I think, in a really important way, and we thought it was like really important to preserve that dialogue. And a lot of time and a lot of conversation was put into thinking and editing how to do what happened in that room that night the right way. So and that's what you saw is what we arrived at. So
can you tell us about you do wind up blurring faces, but not but not removing them from the film. So where does that fall in terms of the dialogue you're having with the subjects?
Yeah, so everyone in the film, that you can see their faces, we have releases from, and there's 2 men who the lawyer who got up and gave that incredible impassioned speech, I don't know if he was visiting from out of town or something, but like we just were not able to track him down. We had all of our friends, all of our organizers, like all of our lawyer friends, everyone looking for him, and no one was able to find So, just given the nature of what he was talking about and our own feelings about, the importance of like agency and representation, we felt that like, what he was saying, he entered into a public space, right? Like, or not a public space, but, this space where we had entered an agreement, with the pastor that would, allowed us to film there. So we felt that it was important to preserve what had happened, but to take like the necessary steps to like, not disclose his identity. So we felt that the blurring was an effective compromise of those situations. And, we really wish, we literally tried for 2 years, like just everything that we could, like, yeah, but he will remain a mystery. And, I really wish that I could say to him, how important he was, and how much I respect what he was saying, and his ability to articulate his position in that moment.
So once you've spent your time with these two major sort of technology innovators, what's the next step for you? Because there's a lot of really interesting research that you present to us that's really the stitching between the more kind of traditional documentary segments. What precisely were you looking for? Like the origin of of motion picture, or the origin of I guess sort of like medical advancements in optic science? I'm not even sure what that would be. For you, what drives you in the research phase?
Honestly, I just think I get really excited by connections, and just by unexpected connections. And I just kind of like, it feels like when I'm researching or reading, I'm always just I find an image that I find really compelling, or just something that sticks out in my head, like the axon and the taser, and I file that away somewhere, and then I'm reading, and then I read about Murray and the photographic revolver, and then all of a sudden these things glom together, and it just kind of feels like I'm like just gently pulling this thread that, like, it's not, I'm not even like saying anything new in this film. Like everything that I'm saying in this film is, from like the incredible research of people who've come before me, and we have a partial bibliography at the end of the film, and there's like, we're going to be putting out a more full bibliography shortly. But I think that like this film just presents an opportunity, and my research process just like allows me to make connections between all of this work that really inspires me, and that like I've become, a much better person because of. And yeah, so it's really just kind of like finding these points in space and time, and just kind of like just gently pulling a thread, and then you find something that really you're drawn to. I have my own interests. I'm drawn to certain types of images, and you file them away for later, and you don't really have a goal of like looking at the birth of medical, whatever. It's like I'm just collecting, and finding ways of smashing things together, and like, after a long enough time, you end up with like a film or something worse.
No, I think that's actually one of the characteristics of this and Rat Film that make them really incredibly compelling, because they're just throwing so many ideas at you that you sort of juxtapose these things, and all of a sudden you're actually engaging with this material in a very intellectual way, as well as an emotional one, which is again why I'm so glad there was that scene in the sort of the community meeting, because it's really bringing the intellectual part into direct face to face with the emotional side of it. I am curious about your decision with the footage at the end with the students. You were going to use it, but you didn't, and I think that's kind of outlined well in the film. But I'm curious to know at what point in your production you started to, you embarked on that, and what did you think it was going to do in terms of its overall placement in the film?
Yeah, I think really early on, we recognized that we were tracing a very particular thread in the history of photography and moving images, particularly a very violent one, that I think, as you saw in the film, and I'm sure that you'll see elsewhere, there's a lot of lot of present day ramifications of that, you know, and it's still kind of echoing through the present. And I think that we always knew that that wasn't the only history. We didn't want it to be like the authoritative history. We wanted to, you know, make space for and acknowledge that there were, you know, really bluntly speaking, cameras can do some good stuff too. You know, like there's really rich histories of people, particularly marginalized people, using cameras to generate worlds and possibilities that aren't necessarily like available to them, you know, in that moment in time. I mean, you look at some of the very earliest photographers were Black, and they weren't necessarily making photographs to counter a white gaze. It was documenting like portraits and normalcy and like photos of Black life, and like that normalcy in itself was like this beautiful radical act. And like, you know, we wanted to make sure that like there was that, without defining that in our film, that we were like leaving space for that. So with all these conversations, we always thought that, you know, as you're sort of seeing the police use these you know, you're learning to see in this one mode, and we wanted to sort of have students learning to see, you know, in another mode. And it was, you know, we were with them for like 5 or 6 months, and it was like a really beautiful, meaningful experience. And, you know, we like, yeah, it was a really important time in our life and their life. And we were really made sure that our time together wasn't just for the film, that if we were going to be in that classroom with them, that we were going to be helping teach, we're going to be leading workshops, we're going to be lending equipment or skills or advice. And so working with Dr. Pat, the teacher, we just really designed this semester that could work, you know, symbiotically. And so with all that being said, you know, we spent this time together. We had all these like whatever, like, you know, highly conceptual conversations. We had this beautiful footage that documented this incredible experience. And we got to a point in the film where, you know, even like the version that we were starting to send to festivals, like it had it all in there and it was threaded throughout. And, you know, it was always a feeling I had, but like after showing it to some friends as well, like, you know, you have, you know, it's just like montage 101, right? You just have like an image of someone pointing a gun, and then, you know, that person's a cop, and you have an image of a kid, you know, a Black kid in a classroom, right? Like, and those images next to each other position that kid as a victim. And that was like, and like, to, you know, we're not denying the fact that to like be Black in this country is to be a target of this surveillance technology, but like it made us really question our own role as filmmakers, as white filmmakers, like just reaffirming that relationship. And like, what are we doing if like our big, like, you know, final conclusion that we're just reinforcing this relationship of you know, perpetrator and victim. So, you know, taking it all out didn't feel right either. It felt like erasing this process was not the right thing. So the epilogue was this like, you know, just this, yeah, I mean, it took like 2 years to figure out how to do that right, just in the editing room, of just like taking it out, showing like having conversations with trusted ones. And, you know, that epilogue was a way of just sort of like having it be a space of possibility, while also maintaining the opacity of these kids' lives, and that they have their own agency to generate something else that isn't necessarily for the film that I'm making. And I think the thing that, why I can live with that decision is, you know, not like, you know, whatever, it might have been a better film, right? Like it might have like appealed to like, you know, very particular types of audiences. Like, you know, I'm thinking of like particularly like very white festival audiences, to like have that, to like have these kids be symbols of hope throughout my film. Like it would have been like really effective dramatically, but like it just didn't sit right with me. And so the thing that why I like feel good, you know, about our time together is that like, regardless of this film that we're, you know, going around, like we had a great experience together. I know I had an awesome time, and I know those kids had an awesome time. So like that's the medium long version of it.
So I just want to say to everyone out there in the audience, I'm going to take some questions for you guys in a moment, but normally and I should have said this at the beginning, it's really nice to actually see your faces. So if you asked a question in the Q&A box and you don't want me to bring you over to potentially turn on your camera and ask your question live, just shoot a quick note saying, for me to read it out loud. Otherwise, what I'll do is just invite you over and you can turn on your camera and ask your question directly. And I just want to ask one last thing before I do that, which is there are some really interesting reactions from some of the police that are in the training session when they're getting sort of the demonstration about the body cam. And I'm just curious, like what, was there more of an impulse to sort of get their opinions on record for what they thought about it, or were the expressions enough, and or what was the deal with the police to have you in the room shooting that in the first place?
Wait, sorry, could you say that one more time? Like the question?
Sorry, so was there like a desire to actually talk to them more directly about their impressions about the body cam and their relationship to it in terms of their work, which was one part of it, but also I guess tied into that is, did the police impose any restrictions upon you actually being in the room filming one of their trainings?
We negotiated almost everything beforehand. So I made sure that I knew that I wanted access to all the video that the officers had. It was like 7 months of negotiation with their press agent to sort of to get what I needed. It was very planned and very staged, and I sort of had watched a lot of press coverage of the body camera class, so I sort of knew what I was getting into. So anyways, we did talk to the police officers. We got some interesting stuff. I think just technically the sound wasn't great because there was like so much stuff going on. Also, it was just like it was already pushing the limits of how long this film could be. But we did get some interest. I mean, that woman you saw at the end, sort of like, look, it's like my first day getting my body worn camera. I'm so excited. I thought, sometimes like you get a lot of like pretty good footage, and then you have like one very short, like excellent moment, and that's all you need, and it makes everything else superfluous. So I thought that like just that woman kind of turning the camera like held the complexity of all of everything that was happening in that moment.
Okay, so I'm going to start by bringing over Brody Fox, and basically I'll put just a few names down in the chat so that you guys know that I'll bring you over, and we've got time for just a handful. So when I bring you over, just keep your camera off until I call on you. Okay, so yes, there we go. Hey.
Hi, well, thank you so much for this screening. And Theo, this is an extraordinary film. I heard you mention you have a background in journalism. So I was really curious for you, what some of the distinctions are between journalism and documentary to sort of make truth claims about the world.
And sponsored content.
Yeah, sure. But also, because I can intuit some ways in which the really extraordinary aesthetics of this piece and the way you put it together is something which I intuitively think is not journalism, and yet there's a truth here too. So I'm just curious if you have some thoughts about that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the good question. I don't know if I have as smart of a response as to match the intelligence of that question. I don't know. I mean, I was a really young and eager kid graduating from college, and I applied for a dream job at Vice and kind of like overstated my qualifications. And, that was like my introduction to journalism and to, making it. It was like, it's very sensational, very like kind of by it, that was my introduction to it. And I felt like within 8 months of me graduating undergrad, I was like living in the Eastern Congo, like reporting for Vice. I'd never been to a conflict zone. It's just, I didn't belong there basically. And it took me a really long time to understand, like I didn't belong there. And yeah, so my own stance just kind of comes from interrogating my own position there and interrogating my experiences. And yeah, I don't know. In terms of like a line, it's really hard to say. I think like journalism, I don't think that they're necessarily like opposed. Maybe like one is a subset of another, and that like journalism has like documentary can encompass journalism, but journalism is confined by certain like formal constraints, right? That we all kind of recognize. And 60 Minutes has a style book. They all have these style guides, and which I think are kind of bullshit, because it's like, why is someone centered in the middle of the frame with ring lights in their eyes any more of an objective image than like a talking puppet talking to you? It's like, so yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a good answer to that. I think that it's like a good question. I think that it's like, it's always just in the details. And I think that I'm always for, like, I always love the ways in which like really unexpected works can have a journalistic outlook and also be push the form. I don't know. I think that we just think that these formal rules are written in stone, and I just like to play with that expectation. I think there's a lot of other people too. Sorry, I feel like I'm not really answering your question very well. I don't really have a good answer for that.
You definitely answered it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's welcome over Chris.
Hey, Theo, what's up?
Hey, Chris.
Hey, thanks so much for making this. I was wondering, the music was really impactful for me, and I wondered if you could speak to your collaborative relationship with Dan Deacon. Especially, I'm interested in the way that maybe the music influenced the editing and vice versa. Maybe the editing influenced the music, because you said like near the end of the line, like the final cut differed a lot from some of the cuts that you had going along the way. Like, did you have to re-record music? Like, just super curious about that whole process.
Yeah, no, Dan's a very close friend. I grew up, I didn't grow up in Baltimore, but I grew up like right outside of it. So my very first shows were going to his concerts. And yeah, when I moved to Baltimore after college, I had come back from the Congo, I was like, it's a small town, the creative community is really small. And we started hanging out. I was like making this film about rats, and I asked him to help out, and he said yes. I was like, it's amazing. Your idol is like, said yes. And it started as a fan relationship, grew into like a friendship, and it's grown into like just a deep love and respect on a friendship and collaboration scale, where like I talked to Dan starting very, very early in a project, talking about the themes, showing him like raw footage, just like sort of developing like a conceptual palette. I'm not a musician. We are always just developing our own language, and he's always explaining to me like, how a synthesizer works or what actual reverb is, how that works. So we're both taking our own expertises and like just kind of finding a new language at all times. And that comes across in the edit always. And so I'll have a very rough cut scene. I'll send it to him. He'll build like an ambient bed that's just like kind of just setting the tone for it with no kind of clear breaks. It's just like one or two tracks. And then I'll edit on top of that. And then based on the tempo of that, he'll add like another 2 or 3 stems. And so the thing I should mention about this is we have it's unique for Dan in that he actually sends me all the stems for his work. So he works with a lot of different layers, and when I'm editing, it allows me the control of controlling his stems as well. So he's almost like giving me like a producing role in his tracks, which is like pretty crazy to think, for someone of his skill to like trust that to someone, like me, who has not a musical bone in their body. Yeah, so basically we just go back and forth like that until we keep on adding things, we take it away. And sometimes we'll just say, oh, well, let's swap this section with that section. I'll be like, this is it. And it's really open and organic. It's, he'll change the score, I'll change the edit back and back. And until we kind of reach an equilibrium, and then, we call it quits.
That sounds like a really beautiful relationship. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we just have time for one more, and let's go over to Paulina. Hey.
Hey, Theo, thank you so much for your film.
Thanks.
I didn't know that you were a journalist before watching it, but now it makes a lot of sense to me because I am one too. I used to be a photojournalist before I decided to go back to school. And so like one of the things that troubled me so much was just like producing and reproducing images without, thinking about them critically. So thank you so much for your perspective and for making the film.
Thanks.
My question though is about the structure because, while I was watching it, I was very delighted and intrigued about how much critical theory you managed to include. And while I was watching it, I was like, oh, Foucault, Lacan, everyone, but the bibliography at the end, but it never felt dense to me. And so I'm wondering, when you were putting it together, did you plan for breaks or like, how did you make it so flow so well, given everything that's included?
No, yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that and that it came across that way. I mean, that's just like that's just like the feeling that we wanted to impart is like, I think like the key for me is that I'm not an expert in these things. I have like forever imposter syndrome that like, I feel like I have, I'm reading these books that are just like so inspiring and I'm like, these people are so smart. And I'm just like trying to find a way to like translate them and like, tell other people about how cool this stuff is, and like, I just kind of feel like they're just like watching over me being like, no, you didn't get that right. Like, no, like, that's not right. Like, and so we're always like, it's always this balance of like, and then it's like, you have to add more. And then it's like, you risk becoming pretentious, and then you've left everyone else behind. So like, my attitude is like, really honestly, like, I'm not an expert. I don't know this stuff going in. And when I start a new film, I'm like, just have this like Frankenstein syllabus of all this stuff I'm like cobbling together. And like, I just try to like structure it like I'm like, as I'm learning about it. And I try to be honest to how I'm putting ideas together and like, maybe like, to like onboard people, for people who aren't necessarily familiar with this stuff. And then also like for people, such as yourself who are more familiar, like, I'm not necessarily like going to new depths with this stuff, but hopefully like it's connecting it to like, horizontally to other areas you didn't know were connected. And that's kind of like how I see my role. It's like, I don't necessarily have like the patience or like the academic brilliance to go as deep as like these writers and researchers like that I'm like so inspired by, but like, I feel like film allows me to like connect across all these disciplines. And so, yeah, that's like, I mean, I think like the structure, I could talk more about it, but like, I think that just very loosely, we wanted to like, it's really important that it felt like very dreamlike going from section to section, just, and also kind of like, I mean, I want my films to feel like the internet. Like I want it to feel like you're online. And I think that this kind of goes back to the journalism question of like how we have such a very narrow idea of form. I think like, I think people have such a high visual literacy and most media doesn't give people credit for that. Like we're on our phones reading text and we, get a phone call and then we go to Instagram and then we are watching a video and then we have like, horrible news that we're reading. It's like we're switching all these different contexts and formats and everything all the time. And like, why can't, like we trust ourselves to do that in normal life. Why can't we do that in a film? And so I think I'm always like trying to capture that feeling of switching context and switching formats all the time. And I'm just really inspired, by that journey, like, that like algorithm really that kind of, is pushing us along at all hours of the day. So I try to like be inspired by it rather than feel totally paralyzed by it. But yeah, I think, yeah, that hopefully answers some of your question.
It does. And I think it kind of mirrors the goal of your film that you were talking about earlier, where you were taking this like crazy dense or like crazy inaccessible critical theory and like connecting it to real life. That's like so important. And your film, like by structure, does that too, by like connecting the experience of the film with our like lived experience of how we take in information intentionally. So I think that's really cool. Thanks.
Thank you.
That is actually a great note for us to say goodnight on. And also to get people to recommend the film, which is opening in theaters this Friday in select theaters. Is there a website that they can go to specifically find where it's playing?
It is playing at the Landmark Theater starting Friday, June 4th. I think we're doing like, I don't know, I'm like so disconnected from this process because it's like my least favorite stage of it. I like making it and editing, but this part I normally check out, but I'll do my due diligence. June 4th is when it opens. Yeah, the link that Alex just posted has show times. If you guys are in New York, it's also opening there at IFC Center, and a lot more places opening very soon. I think like throughout June, we're going to be opening, you know, nationwide in a lot more areas. So any, you know, feel like recommending it, cool. I'd appreciate that.
Thanks a million, Theo. I really look forward
Yeah.
to your next film and having you potentially come join us on campus.
Yeah.
And I hope we get to see more of the footage with the students. If that shapes itself into a different project, that would be a lot of fun.
We'll see. Yep.
Good night. Thanks a million.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.